That is a band called the Black Angels with their song Bad Vibrations from an album called Phosphine Dreams. And the Black Angels got quite popular there for a second with another song, which I chose not to play. And I got to see them in concert, and it was a great show to say the least. Quite a throwback to this psychedelic era that was the 60s. And the guys just got a golden voice, in my opinion. This is Hexes and Soldiers, episode number 30. My name is Jason, and it's officially summer. We are in the full swing of things, and of course, if it's summer, that can only mean one of a number of things, but it also means that it's con time. Convention just ended. Got a couple coming up with Gen Con, as well as World Board Gaming Championships. And I thought I'd share this with you guys. I went to the con because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of gaming, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not gamed. And that is a deturned poem, of course, from I Went to the Woods by Henry David Thoreau. And yeah, it's, I've never been to a con. I would love to go. I'm envious. I am jealous of everybody that has gone. Seems like it is a great time, but hopefully that'll change for me in the near future. A lot of things have to happen first. One of them being money, but would love to get to a con sooner than later. So we'll see what can happen. Maybe we can start a get Jason to the con fund and get a piggy bank going or something like that. Shout outs, I'll just say hey to everybody that has been to a con or will be going this year. You guys are guaranteed to have a blast, and you guys get a special shout out. What else? Been tossing the idea of a round of the number 50 being the magic number, and in a past episode I shared with you guys that when do you stop doing something like this? And all good things must come to an end. But I can't go on indefinitely, and I've been tossing that idea around of late. And I thought I'd shoot for episode 50 and then cut you guys loose. That is very tentative. That is subject to change. And that's not to say that I won't come back and say howdy from time to time after that. The blog spot, hexesandsoldiers.blogspot.com. I'll still be hitting that up. But don't want to do this forever, and don't want to become a parody of myself. So I am shooting for around 50 episodes, and that's also assuming I can make it that far. Now, with all the positive and wonderful support I've been getting from everybody, don't see that being a problem, and still have a lot of material to work with and cover, so should be able to make it to 50 with no problem. But that's just what I've been tossing around in my head, and like I said, that's subject to change. So you may or may not have noticed I am actually coming to you with another episode this week, and I was supposed to be heading to St. Louis, which would have prevented that. Well, what's happened is I have a plane ticket to leave this Saturday morning. We'll be gone roughly 8 or 9 days. Get to see the family, and that's important because both my guardians are battling cancer, so that's been going on for a while, and I don't think it's anything life-threatening at this stage, but a lot of chemo and a lot of chemicals and stuff going on, so very scary and trying time for family, and I haven't seen them since this whole thing started, so it'll be good to do that. And so yeah, we'll be gone all next week. As far as the show next week, it is a definite for sure guarantee there will not be a show next week. So I thought I'd come to you this week with episode 30 and then come back around in a couple weeks with 31. So when it comes to games themselves, I went to eBay, which is a very dangerous site. I think I should block myself from that site. Saw a copy of Strategy and Tactics Kharkov game. Been eyeballing it for a while, but what I saw this time was a boxed version of the SPI edition, and I didn't even know there was such a critter. So that was the end of that. I had to order that. That came today, and very excited to get it. But of course, there are two or three things that go ahead of that on the list to do. So that'll have to wait its turn. Then also have D-Day at Omaha Beach. Looks like I will officially be acquiring that as my brother has washed his hands of it. Can't punch the counters. He's irritated with the thing. Not completely happy with the rules. And perhaps most importantly, a new video game that he forgot was coming out has come out. So that was the end of his attempt to get back into analog board war gaming. Fun while it lasted, I guess. But he's back to video gaming, and that's the end of that. What else? Playtesting for Gettysburg The Tide Turns is more or less on pause. I haven't done much with that lately, so got some work to do there, and I think they're due to set us up with a new scenario, and of course the campaign game is down the road, and that's going to be some serious, intense gaming. Still hacking away at the Napoleon game that I'm attempting to design. I have been attempting to design it for a long time, and to be honest with you, I don't see any end in sight. Where I'm at right now is I'm dealing with a map issue. Can't settle on anything I like, so I've just yanked the whole map idea, and I've been playing on a blank board, miniature style, and the thing still works. So that's kind of cool. So we'll see how that goes, and of course that's just an ongoing thing. And no end in sight, as I said, but someday I would like to finish this thing and take it to a con and then present it to some people and see what they think. What else? Combat Commander Europe. Still playing that, but less and less. The whole needing a card to do something is growing more and more painful as time goes on. The game is fun, but it can really get irritating at times, and I think I'm about ready to take a break from Combat Commander Europe. Maybe come back to it. And then that pretty much covers it with me. As far as news goes, it is con time, and like I said, one just ended. And you got World Board Gaming Championships coming up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, August 4th through 10th. You also have Gen Con coming up August 14th through 17th in Indianapolis, Indiana. And if you could only go to one of these, go to World Board Gaming Championships. I assume anybody listening to this show is more of a old school war gamer, and you can go to Gen Con and dig up some stuff there that'll interest you, but you won't have to do any digging at World Board Gaming. It's all going to be there dug up for you and laid out. So if I had to pick between the two, I'd pick World Board Gaming. And then other news we have, Victory Point Games announces the Napoleonic 20 series version 4.0. They posted this on Wednesday, June 18th. And they say that wearing shakos and bearskin caps around the table, the Nappy 20 series developers discussed the future of Victory Point Games' most venerable wargaming series and how we can put our best bayonets forward for the campaigns ahead. The newest upcoming offering will be Hans von Stockhausen's Berlin 20, the 1808 match between Spain's Francisco Castaño and Theodore von Reding's Army of Andalusia and France's Imperial II Corps d'Observation de la Gironde under Pierre Dupont. In this rare Spanish triumph, the French forces were compelled to surrender, dealing a humiliating defeat to Napoleon's cause in the Iberian Peninsula. And with this impending release, they're taking this opportunity to promote their popular series to their higher production standards and give these great new Nappy 20 games upgraded features. Their plan is for all future games to be released in pairs, similar to what they did with Danube 20, which features both Aspirin Essling 20 and Wagram 20 in a single combined package. Some packages may even have more than two games, such as Russia 20 will likely have four, and Germany 20 possibly as many as eight when they finally ship. So they're doing this to deliver the best value for your dollar, giving you two games for a little more than the price of one. So partnered with Berlin 20 will be an as yet unannounced title, also from the Peninsula campaigns, which they currently have in final development. So better still, these games will be in Victory Point Games' larger full-size game box. And this means the rulebook will also be full-size. And the 11 by 17 paper maps in them will receive only a single fold. So inside the box, they can tell you that the cards and counters are in the graphics department queue awaiting a, quote, fresh look. And then you also have from Clash of Arms Games, the Battle of Prague, which looks pretty intense. Prague, the Empty Triumph, Volume 8. In the Battles from the Age of Reason series continues the course of the 7 Years' War in Central Europe. Looks like May 6, 1757, King Frederick II of Prussia sends 65,000 men on a maneuver to turn the right flank of 62,000 Austrians under the command of Prince Charles of Lorraine, who were strongly deployed along a ridge east of the city of Prague. The Battle of Prague components feature a bonus map, counters, and rules for Lobositz expansion, 3rd edition standard BAR series rules, Prague exclusive rules with 7 scenarios and historical commentary. You've got 3 full color period style maps, 420 full color plus 280 black and white counters, 2 full color organizational displays, multiple cardstock charts and tables for play, and 2 10-sided dice. And this whole period style map really intrigues me, not just with this game but in general. And if I could have my druthers, when it comes to my own Napoleonic game, I'd like to have something that looked just like an old school map, but for some reason or another I am just having trouble pinning that down. So then that brings us to, I don't know if I think I'll start the history first and then come to the list. Usually I do the list first, but I'm going to start with the history first and then come back to a list of things you can play. And of course, I'm referring to North Africa, a topic that is long overdue, well neglected, perhaps just as neglected, if not more so, than the Pacific Theater, another arena of war that I've said little to nothing about. But one thing at a time, and start with, I looked at a number of things that I could cover. The whole thing in general, specific battles, which there are a ton of, Tobruk, Gazala, Operation Battle Axe, all kinds of stuff. Kesserine Pass, and so things with the Americans, or you can look at early war when Rommel was just stomping, running, ram shot all over the place. So was able to finally narrow it down to El Alamein, and that's what I settled on, and that's what I'll focus on here in the Situation Room. And then, as I said, we'll come back to the list of games, and not all will, of course, be specifically related to El Alamein, but they will all be related to the North African theater. And there is a lot of stuff. So we'll start and say that El Alamein literally means in Arabic 2 flags. And it's located in northern Egypt, right along the Mediterranean. Though just as hot as the rest of the Middle East and North Africa, El Alamein is slightly cooler thanks to the sea breeze that blows in from the Mediterranean, so they get a bit of a break compared to everybody else. But on October 23rd, 1942, 2 armies would clash for 12 days, and technically this is the second battle of El Alamein, as the first battle, which took place during most of July of the same year. The battle, although a stalemate, halted a second advance by the Axis forces into Egypt. However, an Axis presence near El Alamein, which is about 66 miles from Alexandria, was just too dangerously close to major population centers in the Suez Canal for the Allied forces to allow the status quo to remain, and a second battle of El Alamein would be required to drive the Axis armies out of Egypt for good. So when you look at the Allied forces, that were fighting in North Africa. It's not just the British. It is a whole conglomerate of nationalities and ethnicities. You have Australians, New Zealanders, Canadians. You've got people from India. The Free French are fighting in here. It is a whole hodgepodge of people trying to hammer down the Germans, but more about that in a second. The action begins with a vast Allied artillery barrage that sounds across the desert, heralding the entrance of the British Eighth Army. For 12 days, shells would pound the Afrika Korps. For the Allies, El Alamein is the current stopping point after having been pushed back by the Germans for over 500 miles from Libya. So why Egypt? Well, for the Germans, to take Egypt is to open the front door to the oil fields of the Middle East. And what is more, the Afrika Korps could conceivably even join up with forces in the southern portion of the Soviet Union. One could actually imagine the Germans pushing on to such an extent that they even meet up with the Japanese in the east. What a sight that would have been to see the Germans and Japanese meeting and hugging and shaking hands, or would another battle have developed? Who knows? Anyway, as far as the background goes, in the beginning, it isn't Germany that we find in Africa, but Italy. And Mussolini at this time has visions of a grand Italian Mediterranean empire that extends all the way into North Africa. So he sets his sights on Egypt, which is basically a colony of Britain, more or less. And in September 13th of 1940, Italian soldiers set foot in Egypt, but it isn't long before the poorly equipped army is held up by the British. And on February 6th of 1941, we get the Battle of Beta Fam, where the Brits send the Italians running basically like schoolgirls back into Libya. So what to do? Mussolini has come to North Africa to take over and expand his empire and be looked upon with respect by other countries, and instead he's pushed around by the British. He ain't looking so good, and turns to Hitler, and Hitler turns to him. And here I think we can benefit from the movie The Godfather, which I'm sure most of you have seen. If you haven't, pause this right now and watch the first two. There is no third movie. There is, but it ain't worth watching. Just watch the first two, then come back and listen to the rest of the show. But anyway, think of Hitler as Marlon Brando in The Godfather telling Mussolini, okay, I'm going to help you out. You're in trouble. I'll do this thing. But someday I'm going to need a favor from you. I kind of see that as how it went down. Probably not exact, but you get what I'm saying. So on February 12th, 1941, Hitler sends in Rommel. Who else, right? Who links up with the 15th and 2nd Panzer Divisions in Tripoli. Thus the Afrika Korps is born, and by April 11th of 1941, the now dubbed Desert Fox has pushed the British all the way back into Egypt, while a besieged garrison has been left behind in Tobruk, where the Germans and British basically push each other back and forth. So with heat comes exhaustion, and this is a unforgiving environment, to say the least. You get dehydration and everything that goes along with that. But one thing of particular note is the flies. Flies everywhere, and flies, of course, landing anywhere that there is something to eat, landing anywhere that there is moisture, and just basically follow the armies wherever they go. And I'm sure it's nothing new. The flies have been pestering armies for ages, but flies spread disease, and we all know this. But there's ways to prevent it, and it looks like, and I don't remember exactly where I read this, but it looks like the British dealt with this in a far better way than the Germans did. The British actually had, I don't know if I'd call them formal latrines, but when they did their business, they took care of it and didn't leave any traces. But with the Germans, they simply walked away and squatted in the sand. I don't even think they bothered to dig trenches and bury it or burn it. They just went off and squatted. So what the problem with that is you have flies landing everywhere, landing on that, landing on your food, landing on your face, and you get a real concern with disease spreading. And this is in fact what happens with a lot of people getting sick. And I think a lot of it can be attributed to these quote bathroom habits that the Germans had or had lack thereof. But so yeah, what starts happening is flies quickly spread sickness around, and that seems to affect the Germans a lot more than the British. June 21st, 1942, Tobruk falls to the Germans. Now, this is key because the British supplies that were there, and there was literally a ton of them, now German supplies. And additionally, 35,000 British troops are taken prisoner. So Tobruk was a hell of a victory, and great for the Germans, bad for the British. And the remainder of the British Eighth Army, with the Germans faster on their heels, quickly take up residence at El Alamein. So now that things are getting more serious, and these pesky Germans seem to be not at all like the Italians and a bit more to deal with, Montgomery gets a phone call. So the line of defense that the Allies have taken up at and near El Alamein really consists of about a 40-mile stretch of desert with the sea on one side and a huge impassable depression in the south. Now remember, you need to supply your troops as you move, and Rommel's been doing this ever since he left Tripoli. So now his supply lines extend more than 1,000 miles, which is amazing to conceive. He's using roughly 100,000 tons of supply a month to keep active. And in addition to that, all this stuff is being driven on basically one road. There's like one road that's available, and all this stuff is being driven along it to supply him. Now, the Brits are shooting up his supply trucks left and right, and with Hitler in Russia, there isn't much stuff to go around. I think Rommel is constantly pleading to Hitler to send this, send that, but Hitler doesn't do so. He has his eyes set on bigger and better things, in my opinion. Not that he's completely belligerent to the goings-ons of North Africa, but he's really licking his lips with Russia. And I think he's confident that Rommel has succeeded in the past, and not much to worry about with him. August 13th, 1942, Montgomery finally arrives and gets some sand on his shoes for the first time. What he has to work with by way of available fighting troops is basically an army that is more or less demoralized. This is an army that has been beaten left and right, is black and blue, quite literally, from the Germans. They've had their butts handed to them time and time again, and have basically done nothing but retreat. So one of the first things he does, Monty, is quickly and effectively shapes up his troops and prepares them for more fighting, and instills in them a much needed confidence. For like Napoleon, Montgomery too has a very contagious charisma, and his troops quickly feed off of this. And what is more, Montgomery is also intent on learning who Rommel is. That is to say, on studying the man. And he actually has a painting of Rommel hanging in his command quarters. And this also reminds me of Napoleon, who would not just study battles and tactics, but when he knew who he was going to come up against, he would study the person, study his strengths, study his weaknesses, until he knew that person in some respects better than that person knew himself. And this is the approach that Montgomery pretty much took when it came to Rommel, and I'm sure for Rommel as well, very quickly on, early on, he would have to learn who this Montgomery person was, and how to handle him accordingly. By early October, Montgomery's finished molding his army. So the Germans, who have held up more or less due to a combination of supply issues and facing a general who is no longer retreating. They're holding at El Alamein. They're forming a line, and more than that, they're preparing for an attack. And the Germans know the Allies are preparing for an attack, but they just aren't sure where this is going to occur. So you've got constant aerial reconnaissance on both sides going on, and the reports that Rommel's getting suggests that the attack may come from the south, but in fact, this is what the Allies want them to think, And the Allies, what they're actually doing is, for lack of a better term, using Maskirovka, and the Russians, of course, become masters at this as the war progresses. But this is really what's going on. The Allies are creating false buildups of dummy ammo dumps and tanks, and Rommel, being so short on fuel, really has to be sure which side to bolster. And here I liken him to a goalie just before a penalty kick. If you picture the goalie in the center of the goal and the kicker coming down, the goal is expansive enough. You really can't. What am I trying to say? You almost have to predict before the guy kicks which side he's going to go for, and just cross your fingers. If you wait till he kicks, it's going to be too late. And this is kind of the position that Rommel is in. He has to decide which side of the goal to leap to. If he heads to the south and it turns out he's wrong, he's not going to have the fuel or the time to head back the other direction. And one thing that probably counts against him in this instance is the fact that German tactics really tend to favor acting rather than waiting. And here I think this does Rommel some real harm. Rather than sit back and make sure, or try and see through this mask, he just decides to act, and he's just going by instinct. It's better to act than to do nothing. Sees the artificial buildup in the south, and rather than wait around, he jumps. So meanwhile, Mani heads right for Rommel's now weakened front line. And when you consider that with code breakers who have just recently broken the German codes for communications being transferred back and forth from Germany and North Africa, the Allies also have the benefit of intercepting his supply convoys in the ocean, and only about a third of Rommel's supplies are getting through at this point. And the Allies basically know pretty much everything Rommel's going to do before he does it. It seems the cards are pretty much stacked against him. And what, in addition to all that, Rommel is becoming sick. He's stressed. He's worn out. He's been going nonstop since he got there. He's come down with a fever, and it's just all getting too much for him. So he heads back at the end of the September, and to get some R&R, and the gentleman named Stuma replaces him. But Rommel gets some well-deserved rest, and this Stuma guy comes in his stead. So the Allies at this point, this is like roughly mid-October, they outnumber the Afrika Korps by roughly 2-1, but the Germans and Italians haven't just been sitting on their hands doing nothing either. They have prepared positions about 40 miles long and about 5 miles deep, with mines and wire and all kinds of nasty stuff. And this becomes known as the Devil's Garden. Now the Allies have to cross this thing. How lucky for them, right? And on the October 23rd, 1942, they do just this. The Allies attack. And the battle opens with an artillery barrage, the likes of which haven't been seen since World War I. And this goes on for the next 12 days. Imagine things dropping from the air that want to kill you for 12 days straight. Well, this is what's going on. So Mani acts like he's going south, right? Meanwhile, his engineers are clearing mines in the north, and what he wants is kind of a double pathway cleared so that the Australian 9th Division and the 51st Highlanders can move through. So before too long, you hear bagpipes. It's the dead of night, and you start hearing bagpipes. And this is the 51st Highlanders as they start marching. Machine gun bullets are whizzing past. Not to mention, they have to keep a certain pace. If they go too fast, they risk marching under their own artillery, which is laying down fire before them as they advance. On October 24th, the Australians reach Tel El Isa, but the Highlanders aren't faring quite so well, and in fact, they run basically into an uncleared minefield and a bunch of wires. So now comes the British tanks behind them, traveling along the paths that have been cleared, and these are narrow things. And the British tanks, who can only advance in single file, quickly get jammed up. So by 6 a.m., the Highlanders have only reached half of their objectives and have suffered over 1,000 casualties. So, oddly enough, Stuma, Rommel's replacement, remember him? The guy dies of a heart attack. I'm not sure if he's seen battle before or if he's infirm or what the deal is, but the guy just has a heart attack. So somehow or another, Hitler's able to get Rommel thrown back into the fire and prevent a disaster because basically the Germans have nobody leading them until he gets there. But in the New Zealand sector at Mataria Ridge, the fighting is raging. So Mani sends in the 51st Highlanders again to clear a path for the 1st Armored Division, which they managed to do, but at a high cost. And in the north, you have a place called Kidney Ridge, which was another Allied objective, but it remains completely unsecured. So for the Germans, Rommel's return is a huge morale boost, to say the least. Things are looking kind of iffy. The Allies are coming. They're on the defensive. It looks like Rommel's back, and they'll be back in the driver's seat soon enough, pushing these pesky British away and biting at their heels once again. But by October 26th of 1942, the Battle of El Alamein is 3 days old, and the heaviest fighting can be found in the Kidney Ridge area in the north. And here the Allies continue to smash against the Germans, but they're repelled time and again by the heavy German 88s. Now these are big, gigantic, originally intended to bring down aircraft, but was quickly learned that if you level them out and fire them at tanks, the tanks get blown up. So that's what they're doing here. And there's really nothing to compare to the 88s that the Allies have. So they're getting chewed up left and right. So having realized he's fallen for a trap, Rommel finally reroutes the two groups that were heading south to the north. And on October 27th, he sends the 21st Panzer and an Italian division to Kidney Ridge. And this is where fierce tank battles are occurring at point-blank range with artillery falling everywhere. So on November 1st, you have British artillery in concert with both British and U.S. air support just bombing the living crap out of the Germans. Meanwhile, Rommel can't get any aerial reconnaissance, and his own headquarters has even been blown up. So thinking the Brits are attacking the coastal road, he sends his 21st Panzers north. But when he finally realizes the attack is taking place south of him, it's too late. So Mani sends in another armored assault north of Kidney Ridge, and the New Zealanders finally break through near Tel Al-Akakir. And on November 2nd, Rommel tries to stop the bleeding in his penetrated line by sending in 4 divisions, thus setting the stage for the biggest tank battle of the entire engagement. And eventually the Germans basically run out of tanks. I mean, they fight and they fight and they fight until they got nothing left basically to fight with. So Rommel wants to retreat. He's sized up the situation and determined that it is futile and counterproductive to sit and continue to slug it out, and informs Hitler of this. But of course, you can imagine what Hitler's reaction to that is, and as such, he freaks out. Tells Rommel he isn't going anywhere. He's going to stay there and die. He isn't going to give up an inch of ground. Basically, Rommel just tunes him out. He blows his supply dumps and retreats and saves an army. Now Hitler can rant and rave and pound his fists all he wants, but in the end, Rommel's done him a favor, and I think he will come to realize that later. But there is along the way a fight for Tel Al-Akakir in which the Highlanders yet again proved too much for the Germans, basically, and that's it. The Battle of El Alamein, which went on for about 12 days, ends, and a large portion of Germans escape thanks to Rommel. If Hitler would have had his way, every German and Italian in North Africa would still be there today. So in all, we've got about 13,000 Allies killed, with over 30,000 Germans and Italians killed. The 51st Highlanders suffer the harshest casualties of the battle, with over 2,000 men lost. And then, of course, once the Americans land with Operation Torch, it's a whole new ball game. And the Americans get a bloody nose at Kasserine, but learn quickly and aren't quite so easy to bully after Kasserine Pass, which is basically what the Germans did. But that's North Africa for the most part, specifically the Battle for El Alamein, and brings us to a whole slew of games. I mean, for something that is, how do I put this? The terrain and the nature of the fighting, it might not seem that there is a lot you can do with desert warfare, but at the same time, I think because there is not a lot of terrain and because of the environment, it really forces one to be perhaps more tactical or more strategic than one might normally want to be because there's nothing else to fall back on. So, anyway, that brings us to the list, the never ending list of games. And I've got 10 things I'll start with and then come back to some honorable mentions as well as a classic or two, and then we'll end it there. But we'll start with No Retreat, the North African Front. 2013, this thing came out, GMT, and I'm telling you, oddly enough, you're not going to see a lot of GMT in this list. In fact, I think this is the only one. Carl Paradis, this follows on the success of course, No Retreat, the Russian Front, where the Russian front of World War II beckons. Victory Point Games' dynamic duo of game designer Carl Paradis and his trusty developer Alan Emmerich have teamed up again to produce the second chapter in this gaming series, No Retreat, the North African Front. This time they take the gaming action to the African front from the start of Operation Compass, which took place on December 8th of 1940 through 1942 to the eviction of the Axis from Libya. Building on the notion of a card-assisted game and death or glory victory conditions, No Retreat, the North African Front offers a narrative game rich in the feel for the ebb and flow of the campaign, wrapped around an exciting maneuver and combat system that harkens back to the glory days of classic wargaming, but includes all the modern features and plenty of innovations. Unlike other North Africa war games, there are 5 mini-maps located at the various termini of maneuver in the campaign, and where battles are waged as fascinating mini-games in their own right. Players try to sweep each map and force the action onto the next one in an effort to push their opponent out of the game. This deluxe edition combines both the original game, featuring 5 quick playing scenarios, a tournament game, a full-fledged campaign game, and a bonus Invasion of Crete mini-game, all using deluxe components of Twilight Struggle Deluxe Edition quality. The looming Malta factor is accounted for most assiduously, while abstracted into many aspects of the game. Players must also always be mindful of Malta being made active, that is to say, helping the Allies, or inactive, and assist the Axis. The Italian forces have their rightful place in the story unfolding on the game board, and the remarkable paucity of units turns every counter in Hex into the kind of wargaming puzzle reminiscent of the glory days of those great contests from the Avalon Hill General magazine. The use of supply point markers received in a fast, hassle-free way to seize the initiative, replace losses, and recover shattered formations to light up a map and begin operations there, and then to continue those player turns for another round. Each additional round of players' turns must be paid for by another supply point, usually spent by the side that feels it is advantageous to press on and keep the opponent hard-pressed, recreating simply and effectively the lulls and starts in battlefield operations that were a signature of this campaign. The desert lies before you, and World War II is at stake. You must endure and prevail under the most surprising and grueling of circumstances, for there is no retreat. That is number 10. Number 9, Africa. This would be the first edition, and I must specify that, as you'll see why later. Mr. Dean Essig, and 1993, this comes out, wins the Charles S. Roberts Award for Best World War II Game. It is the second game in the Gamers Standard Combat series, and it covers a period of time roughly from 1940 to 1942. Number 8, Field Commander Rommel, 2008, Dan Viersen Games. This was designed by Dan Viersen and is the first game in the Field Commander Solitaire series of historical strategy board games. The player takes command of General Erwin Rommel's forces in 3 exciting World War II campaigns, France 1940, North Africa 1941, and D-Day 1944. So not specifically a North Africa game, but it is in there. An easy-to-use game system of battle plan and operation plan shits manages the Allied movement, combat, and reinforcements. And each campaign comes with a list of historical options that the player can modify to adjust its difficulty level and improve replay value. Also, as units win battles, stats increase to affect ensuing battles and movement. The game comes with career rules that allow the player to link campaigns so that the outcome of one campaign affects the startup conditions for the next campaign. That is number 8, Field Commander Rommel, which brings us to number 7, Sicily Triumph and Folly 2000, The Gamers, again Dean Essig, 2000 Charles S. Roberts, best World War II game, winner, the 7th game in the Gamers' popular, and I would add to that very popular, OCS series. This covers Operation Husky from the invasion to the fall of Messina, and the game includes a few shorter scenarios, plus several different start dates for the campaign games based on the various critical events of the campaign. Playing time can be a couple hours for the shorter scenarios, but as with all the OCS games, the real money is in the various campaigns, which, while quite manageable on the scale of these things, still can take from 1 to 2 full weekends to play to completion. That was Sicily Triumph and Folly. That brings us to number 6, DAC, or Der Afrika Korps. Another gamer's title, 1997, Dean Essig. 1997, Charles S. Roberts, World War II game winner and best graphics winner, which that's interesting considering that you're covering a bunch of desert. What can you do graphics-wise with that? But they pulled it off. The 5th entry in the gamer's popular OCS series, and the grandest in scope, Der Afrika Korps covers the entire North African campaign at the regimental level from Compass to El Alamein and beyond. This is the most specialized of the OCS titles, with rules for Commonwealth brigades and unusual organizations, minefields, the Greek campaign, and a variety of others, including the humorous poke at Richard H. Berg with the Italian pasta rule. And then they say there is no rule for the Italians' preference for pasta. So that's number 6, Der Afrika Korps. And then number 5, Shifting Sands, 2006, MMP, Michael Ranella. Shifting Sands is a point-to-point movement, card-driven game based on the World War II African campaigns of 1940 to 1943. From the first Italian attempts to cross the wire through the Torch invasion, all aspects of the campaign for North Africa are covered, including the Abyssinian campaign of 1940 to 41. Like the commanders of the day, you'll need to try and achieve your goals, while events in other theaters influence your ability to maintain any semblance of a plan. That is Shifting Sands, which brings us to number 4, Africa, the 2nd edition, MMP 2006, Dean Essig. And I'm going to guess here that Mr. Dean Essig owned a sandbox at some point in his life. The guy seems to be prolific when it comes to these Afrika Korps games, and I owned one as well, and I had many an hour of fun recreating battles in my sandbox. Every 4th of July, pretty much anything I owned by way of plastic soldiers and tanks was blown up with firecrackers, but I had a lot of fun doing it. Standard Combat Series game covering the campaign in North Africa. 2nd edition of the Charles S. Roberts, a best World War II game that came out in '93. Fast-paced game of mobile warfare at the operational level. The heart of the game is the supply system, which highlights the logistical aspect of desert warfare. And so I guess if you were to get one of the two, I would recommend the 2nd edition. Which brings us to number 3, Tunisia. The Gamers again, 1995. I'll give you a guess. Ready? Dean Essig. And this is also won the Charles S. Roberts Award for Best World War II Game in '95. So Operational Combat Series, it goes to the North African Theater of Operations. The game simulates the beginning of the Tunisian campaign, November of '42, till the surrender of all Axis forces in Africa, which happened around May of '43. Brings us to number 2, DAC 2. That's right, the updated version of the Monster Classic deck, M&P 2004. Of course, Dean Essig, who else? This is the most sought after and highly collectible of the gamer's line. The original deck was quickly sold out without a trace, and in response to popular demand, M&P republished the game in 2004. And I am a proud owner of DAC 2, but unfortunately, I have not had the strength, will, or energy to set this thing up and play it to its grandest ability. Perhaps someday that will happen, but as of yet, it hasn't. One of the interesting things with this game is it has a random events table, and it's broken down into common events, less common events, rare events, and ultra rare events. But among some of the interesting stuff, you have under less common events, Rommel goes off half cocked, and it says October 41 or earlier. Rommel in play. Rommel at or within 12 hexes of any enemy unit. Part of the price paid for the extra initiative Rommel provides is that sometimes he does things that are not well thought out. This effect was most pronounced in the early stages of the campaign before Rommel developed his desert sense fully. And it says any stack stacked with Rommel right now must make at least one overrun attack this turn with their action rating reduced by 1. Rommel's normal action rating effect is inverted. Rommel does not roll for his own loss as a result on this attack. You didn't think he'd go with him, did you? And then they have the allies crack the Wehrmacht code, so they work that in. Rommel gets sick. It says July 42 or later, Rommel in play. Months of desert warfare take their toll on Rommel's health. No longer able to keep pushing on, Rommel takes the advice of his doctors and reports back to Germany for a cure. Rommel leaves the game for 2 calendar months and returns as a reinforcement. And then in rare events, you have Germans reveal shipboard radar to astounded Italians. Rommel brags to Mussolini. It says Rommel proclaims to El Duce that he will be in Cairo in a week. Mussolini rubs his hands with glee and boards an Italian transport with his white charger for the impending triumphal entry into Cairo. After a look at Westphal's situation map, Rommel realizes the nonsense in his bombast and decides to put on a good show to save face. The Axis must make a minimum of 3 attacks, regular or overrun this turn, and each attack must have at least 1 German unit in it. Another includes Aussies Go Home, and perhaps most interesting or odd is severe hoof and mouth outbreak. Remove all 3 camel units, which includes 1 Italian, 2 Egyptian, from the game due to a dromedary disease epidemic. So that's interesting stuff. That brings us to number 1, Rommel in the Desert. Columbia Games, of all things, 1982, Craig Besenkiel. Rommel in the Desert is a pre-front game touching on the conflict between the British and Germans in North Africa. A game of maneuver. Each side has to move with precision and know when to strike, since a cut in supply spells disaster for either side. The supply system is card-driven, and the game comes with a well-painted map of North Africa and 100 wooden blocks to represent the British and Germans. So there's top 10 list for you as far as North Africa games, which brings us to honorable mention. And I'm going to mention 2 games from Revolution Games, the ones that did Cell's Battle of the Bulge, Gazala and Operation Battle Axe. We'll start with Gazala. And Gazala the Cauldron 2013, this came out, of course, Revolution Games. Mr. Roger Miller simulates the mobile portions of the Battle of Gazala south of Tobruk between May 27th and June 14th of 1942. An Axis attack was met by a furious Allied counterattack, which then developed into a grinding battle of attrition and a maneuver that finally ended in massive Axis victory. Alternating random activation by formation provides players with uncertainty and high replayability, as no 2 games will be alike. Each turn, player receives a varying number of activations to represent the supply levels. Command confusion, you've got fatigue and intelligence of their armies, and this leads to an ebb and flow to the battle as each side is dominant at different times. After units move, strengths are deduced to simulate fatigue and lack of defensive preparation, making counterattacking key to the game. Minefields, air power, anti-tank abilities, and the armor versus infantry conflict are all modeled in a simple and effective set of rules. So you get 2 scenarios. and they say a playing time of about 3 to 7 hours. I guess if you play in fast forward, you play it in about an hour and a half. Operation Battle Axe, 2013. Again, a Revolution Games. Mr. Michael Ranella. This is a quick playing depiction of June 1941, the Allied offensive in the North African desert. The Allies possess more tanks, including the Queen of the Desert, the Matilda, and have mastery of the air, crossing the Egyptian border into Libya. Their mission is simple: destroy the Afrika Korps and lift the siege of Tobruk. The Axis forces in the path of the Allied advance occupy well-prepared strong points, and lurking somewhere behind them are the German panzers and Rommel, the Desert Fox. The next 3 days of battle will decide the course of the war in the desert for months to come. Utilizing a new and streamlined version of the area impulse system, players will experience the uncertainty of the desert battlefield. Each turn will contain a variable number of impulses, and both players will be challenged to determine whether it is better to attack first or defend and then counterattack. Having committed one's infantry and armor to battle, artillery support may or may not be available. To win, the Allied player must exploit his numerical edge in armor and artillery plus air power to capture Axis positions and destroy German units. The Axis player must exploit his greater speed, operational flexibility, and superior battlefield recovery to recapture lost ground and destroy Allied units. Fast, furious, and chess-like, this is a game for players who love concentrated action. And I'll also add reluctant enemies to the list. I think this thing is destined to become a classic. This is your OCS starter kit, as I've been calling it. And I'm going to also add to this list the classic Panzer Army Africa. Throw that in there somewhere. It's a great game. Of course, a couple editions of that. You've got the SPI edition and the Avalon Hill edition. And then you also have Tobruk, came out in 1975. Avalon Hill, basically a tank combat simulation of North Africa. In 1942, your rules include morale, overrun, armor penetration, smoke, Stuka aircraft, forward observers, artillery, grenades, dummy guns, dust storms, close assaults, and a whole lot more. Every important German, Italian, British, and American weapon is represented. So you're looking at over 500 counters and 3 map boards, some charts, and a 36-page rule book. And this is a classic. I own this game, and it is tons of fun to play. And also, I'll add, if you're into ASL, well, they don't ignore North Africa. You got the whole west of Alamein thing going on there, and plenty of desert action. You also have Hollow Legions, which introduces the Italians to the ASL order of battle, and I think there's some stuff there. But North Africa gets his due in ASL as well. So finally, I'll add the insane campaign for North Africa from SPI. This came out in 1979 and is a war game like no other, basically. Although the map is big at about 10 feet, the game is smaller than other games, smaller than Europa, for one. And there are not as many rules as in ASL, yet this is the biggest monster game out there for a number of reasons. The game is detailed to a degree no other game has come close to. If using the full rules, you keep track of every individual plane and pilot in the 3-year campaign, and each counter on the board representing a ground unit is composed of many units which are kept track of on logs. Supplies are kept track of and dispersed in a very detailed manner. From the rule book, we read how to run a game. Campaign for North Africa is a logistically oriented game, and its play requires not only a lot of attention to logistics, but, if you will, a logistically sound methodology. It is suggested that you have 5 persons per side with the following duties. Commander-in-Chief, who will be responsible for strategic decisions and to settle inter-team disputes. Logistics Commander, who will be in charge of all supplies and accepts supply requisitions from the others and keeps all informed of supply shortages. Is in charge of supply dumps, third-line trucks and some second-line trucks, and is in charge of naval convoys. And you'll have your rear area commander, who gets the supplies to the front, in charge of security, reserves, prisoners, and construction. You'll have an air commander, who's in charge of all planes and pilots and is responsible for planning air missions and deployment of air bases. A frontline commander executes all attacks and troop movements in the front line and helps with coordinating defensive efforts. And to say that playing time with 10 players is listed at 1,200 hours. And I want to ask, a game of this scope, did they, I mean, the play testing must have been brutal. You have to play test it, otherwise it's broken. I mean, and you can't just play it once. So if with 10 people, it takes 1,200 hours to complete this thing, and you want to run it through a cycle of plays testing, I mean, for God's sakes, I don't even know if this was cost effective. The SPI probably lost money on this game. That's my bet. Anyway, someday I'll own it. Will I play it? No. But as a collector, from a collector's angle, someday I'll grab this thing up. Way too expensive at the moment. These things are pricey, pricey, pricey. But yeah, I'll grab this up at some point. Looks like the cheapest copy available on the Geek is going to cost you 200 bucks, and that's just for an acceptable copy. It's probably got coffee stains and chewed up hamster rules and a highlighting and who knows what else. But well, again, it's one of those things. If you have a group of people that are dedicated to a long-term project, sure would be cool to do this and blog your progress. Wow. So that's a number of games you can play. Certainly not an exhaustive list either. Quite probably the longest list game-wise that I've introduced in any of these shows thus far. And as I said, there's plenty that has been left out. So with all these games, I know what your next question is. You're saying, Jason, all these games, where do I start? I want to do some Africa stuff. I don't want to spend a lot of money. I don't want a high-priced, out-of-print game. I don't want something that's going to take 5,000 hours and 15 people to play. But at the same time, I don't want something that is laughably easy and funny. I want it something that will treat this history and simulate it to a respectable level. And I say to you, Panzer Army Africa, this is what you want. Now, it is out of print, but you can find used copies of this fairly cheaply. I mean, it doesn't cost much. And I'm referring specifically to the Avalon Hill version. There's a SPI edition, but I would grab the Avalon Hill edition. That's what I have. That's what I've played. Time-tested game, classic, not too deep, not too shallow, just right. So it passes the Goldilocks test. And so the game is very intense, very suspenseful contest, a sweeping maneuver, lunging attacks, desperate retrogrades, filled with threat, counter-threat, surprises, and more. And the action on the map is similar to watching two snakes wrestle. Things move with lightning speed and sudden changes of direction. So you've got the Allies, which consists of UK and Empire Commonwealth forces, and they include units from India, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, as well as a few Allied units under British command. The Axis consists of Germany and Italy. Vichy French forces are not represented as they did not fight in this particular part of the theater. A glance at the game counters reveals some interesting details. The most striking thing is the very high movement factors in the game. And German units have the highest at 60 movement factors. The Allies have 50, and the Italians have 40. And both sides have trucks to move supply markers around with, and there's markers for unsupplied units. Counter set includes variant order of battle units players can experiment with that include additional Panzer and Fallschirmjäger divisions for the Axis and U.S. brigades for the Allies. And the game situation begins with the Axis at El Agheila on the far left side of the map, and the Allied defenders strung out along the coastal road from there all the way back to Alexandria on the far right side. Action seesaws back and forth across the map, with the fortress of Tobruk in the middle of the map being a key pivot point for both sides. The coastal road and tracks are high-speed avenues of approach. One movement point along the road and two movement points along the tracks. Movement is constrained by escarpment hexes, which cost 10 movement points to cross, rough terrain and swamps, which cost 10 movement points, and fort-controlled hexes. Units on them must fight enemy units in the adjacent fort. Trucks can only move along the roads and to a far lesser extent on tracks. The turn order, this is a traditional I go, you go sequence of play. During player turn 1, move and fight all, some, or none of the friendly units, with one important exception for the allied player, the notorious command and control rule. The first player, who is the allied, executes the following supply determination phase. He checks to see which friendly units are in supply and which are not. Then the allied command and control phase, where you roll to see what 3 hex numbers are affected. Units occupying those hex numbers cannot move or fight that turn. And I think that's interesting. You don't see this too often, I don't think, in a lot of games. I'm going to go over that more in detail. It says, command and control, general rule. The allied player is burdened with command control problems. During the command control phase of his game turn, he must roll the die once for each allied occupied hex and consult the command control chart. If the last digit of the hex in question corresponds to any of the numbers cross-referenced to the die roll, the units in that hex may not attack during the game turn. Loss of command control is indicated by flipping affected units face down and turn units face down up again at the end of the allied player turn. The command control chart has a die roll with your corresponding hexes that are affected. So on a 1 die 6, if you roll a 1, the hexes affected are 7 and 3. A 2, hexes affected are 8 and 4. 3, hexes affected are 5 and 9. With 4, your hexes affected are 6 and 0, while your affected hex for rolling a 5 is 1, and the affected hex for rolling a 6 is 2. So that might not sit well with a lot of people, but I find it interesting. It might seem forced or fiddly, but again, I like the idea. I don't have that big of a problem with it. Movement phase, well, you move units. Combat phase, judge attacks, supply, and then make attacks. Reinforcement and replacement phase, where you bring on reinforcing units and replace combat casualties from cadre status. And this second player, who is the Axis, conducts a similar sequence, but without the command and control phase. You've got supply determination phase, movement phase, combat phase, and reinforcement replacement phase. The rules and mechanics, number of unique mechanics that distinguish this title from just about every other game on the subject. Movement, the movement factors, as mentioned earlier, are huge. Given the time scale of 1 month, mechanized units can easily traverse the length of the map when on the coastal road, and this is reflected in the game. Movement off-road, particularly across the desert, costs a higher number of movement points, but still some units are capable of screaming across the open terrain, and this makes for an extremely fluid game where penetration exploitations and flanking movements are particularly deadly. And then when it comes to combat, instead of an odds ratio table, the game uses a differential combat results table, which was used a lot by SPI in those days. The attacker subtracts the defender's combined combat factors from his own to show a positive differential, such as like +1 or +2, etc., and rolls the dice against this, the resulting numbers compared to the combat factors of the participating units, and if the resulting number matches or is higher than at least one of the defender's participating units, it's eliminated. Attacker losses are handled using a unique counterattack mechanic, and surviving defenders get to attack back with no terrain modifiers and with increased combat capability. And the Allies and Italians counterattack at double combat factors, as the Germans counterattack with a whopping quadruple combat factor. So, supply. Panzer Army Africa forces the players to create a chain of supply units. As they advance across the map, combat units are in supply within a particular range, and have the option of increasing their combat factors and attacks by expending a supply unit when attacking fortresses like Tobruk. This is the only way players have a chance to take it. Of course, these chains of supply units are vulnerable to rear area raids by enemy combat units, so one must have secure flanks. And in the vastness of the desert, this can be a tricky thing to accomplish. The Germans have the additional advantage that they can move so that they're out of supply, intending to achieve through combat action a restored supply line. There's an optional rule set covering the controversial issue of the invasion of Malta by the Axis, as well as allied options to bring in units which were not historically committed to the campaign, to include U.S. units that ended up conducting Operation Torch. So I would say overall, when it comes to this game, You're going to need to be a master of positioning, and in that sense, I guess you could say it's chess-like. But if you've been playing war games for a while, you'll have no problem picking this up rather quickly. But it's going to take a few plays to master it as such. And in that sense, it is very challenging. If you're new to wargaming, you may want to stay away from this. Find something a little easier. But it's a decent game. And again, I'm referring specifically to the Panzer Army Africa Avalon Hill Edition from 1981, which is the one I have. And as I mentioned before, you should be able to pick this thing up for a fairly decent price on eBay or from the Geek. But there's a couple paragraphs of designer's notes, and that's what I'll end with. And it says the situation in North Africa was unique. It was not repeated anywhere else throughout the war. This alone merited a novel game system. The forces involved compared to what went on in other theaters were quite small. An army of usually no more than a dozen divisions on each side. In this campaign, more than any other, logistics was the key. The battle line ebbed and flowed according to the supply status of each side. There were additional problems affecting the design of a game on this campaign. The campaign was a long one, some 20 months, not including the earlier Italian phase and the later Tunisian phase. Not only was the campaign long, but there were periods of as long as 6 months during the campaign when literally nothing happened. In addition, the campaign was also characterized by short periods of very intense activity. Enormous territorial gains were made in periods of less than a month. All of this required a very special game system. Now, historically, the campaign is a simple one to describe. The British, after soundly beating the Italians in early 41, stripped the area of forces in order to aid Greece. This gave Rommel his first opportunity, and he took full advantage of it. He threw the British back to Tobruk and almost took that fortress, but he was operating on a logistical shoestring and wasn't able to seize the fortified port of Tobruk and thus ease his supply problems. This caused a stalemate. The British had greater resources in the area and eventually launched an offensive which threw the Germans back to their starting positions. At this point, it was the British who were operating at the end of an insufficient logistical supply line, and soon the Germans built themselves up to strength and threw the British back once more. This time, the Germans were able to take Tobruk and defeated the British again in the bargain. The British were then pursued all the way to El Alamein. At this point, another lull occurred, after which the Battle of El Alamein was fought. The Germans were decisively beaten, and the campaign was over. Always outnumbered, the German-Italian forces benefited greatly from the shortcomings of the British forces. Many of these British liabilities were material and tactical, and thus could be built into the units themselves. But at the highest levels, there were also decisive problems for the British. We sum this up in a British command control rule. Otherwise, there is no easy way to recreate the problems the British had in using their numerically superior army. Being new, the Panzer Army Africa game system will take a little getting used to. Remember, this is back in 81. It's basically simple, but let's face it, there are no other games around which give units 40 to 60 movement points per phase. In addition, there are a host of other unique rules which, taken together, will cause even the most experienced gamer to start from scratch and learn a whole new game. The war in North Africa was unique, and we feel that it requires a unique game to recreate the situation. A unique game and a simple one so that players may concentrate on the tactical and strategic possibilities of the situation at hand. We feel we have succeeded in producing a novel and easy to play game on this campaign, and we hope you agree and enjoy the game. And I do agree, and I have enjoyed the game, and thank you, Avalon Hill, and thank you guys for listening. This has been episode 30, my attempt to cover all things North Africa and history and games. I will hopefully be back with you 2 weeks from now, as this coming week I will be in St. Louis. So thanks for listening, and keep gaming.